Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into this video hosted by Berklee's Music Production and Engineering and Mentoring program. Today we're going to cover a whole bunch of workflow stuff related to the SSL Duality console. I wasn't planning on making a video out of this talk, so I was just kind of freestyling through this, so things aren't necessarily in the most logical order. So the SSL Duality is in fact not a part of Berklee's core MP&E curriculum. So this video is intended to help students get started and able to run a recording session on the SSL Duality. Of course, this board has some really deep mix workflow. It's also a Pro Tools control surface, but we're going to be honing in on just the recording workflow of the board. If you've never worked on the console before, I would highly recommend watching this video all the way through, until probably about an hour in. If you get through that much, you probably will have a pretty good idea of how to use things, because I do drop some very important bits of information at various points throughout the video. I hope you enjoy, and let's dive right in.
Hopefully you can all kind of, at some point we might try gather around a bit to see some shit on the board. It might be a little difficult, but I'll try say button names and stuff, so if you're taking notes you can write them down. But yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a dive into the SSL. I'll spend the first half of this sort of making sure everyone can just run the session, just get signal in and record it, and sweet. And then at that point, if you're like, my brain's overloading, I don't want any more, you are welcome to leave, because after that I'll go into some of the deeper workflow of stuff, some weird tricks I use for talkbacks that can get a little deep, and talking about some of the functionality you might never use but is interesting about this board. So yeah, at any point if you're like, okay, that's enough, my brain's overflowing, I'm not going to retain anything else, it's just going to become more confusing, you are welcome to duck out. No offense taken, because this is different to the other boards in many ways, so it can feel a little daunting. Okay, so I'm going to explain how to run Signal. I'm going to explain it in two different ways, because there are two distinct ways that one would usually use on this console. And I'll say that after I show you the ways to do them, that I have actually built some presets into the total recall system on this board, which you guys are all welcome to use, but I caution you to totally rely on the presets, because someone might edit them. I had built some presets last semester and I came in here and the whole memory of the board was wiped and they were gone. If it's been edited, or if they're gone, or if halfway through the session you have to change something and you don't actually know the workflow of the board and you're relying on the preset, it's dangerous. You'll be a bit fucked, because also yeah, don't have the mentality that like, I'll use the preset and if something breaks I'll ask studio ops, because most of the studio ops people aren't actually very trained on this board either. There's only about 3 supervisors that are really well acquainted with it, and only one that I know of that actually uses the recall system. So if you call them in and you're like, oh, I've used the recall but it's not working, most people will be like, don't know what to tell you. So try not to totally rely on the recall. It's helpful, but yeah, try to just get the actual workflow in your head as well. So I think the main thing is that this board is not an inline console. And just as a refresher, an inline console means you have two paths. You have the channel path, and you have a small fader usually associated with that. That's a fader of some sorts. And then you have the monitor path, which is the large fader, and your signal goes to Pro Tools, gets recorded, and then you monitor over here. And that's what the API is, and that's what the Neve is. This board is not built that way. There's only one fader, but it has a certain functionality that allows it to sort of function as if it were an inline console. But that's not inherently what it is, and that's one of the more complicated things to understand about it. So this board has only one fader. Makes sense. Cool? If anyone has any questions as I'm going, please stop me. But yeah, so I think the first thing to discuss is probably what to do when you get into this room, just to get set up and started on the patch bay, and then we'll go through the signal flow of stuff. So annoyingly, okay, this is my favorite board at Berklee actually, which is an unpopular opinion. I like this more than the Neve. I find the workflow just way quicker. It's just like, it has a lot of deep functionality to it that the other boards don't have. However, the way it's actually set up in this room is a little annoying because like hardly anything is normal to anything. If you want to speak out to the control room monitors, you've got to patch that. So when I walk in here, that's usually the first thing that I do, so that while we're setting up, I have communications with assistants and stuff setting up in the room. So the way I'll do that, you know what, let me pause for a second. Let me talk about some terminology because I'm about to start saying words that probably mean nothing. So a big difference between these boards and the API and the Neve is the terminology that SSL uses to describe things. So the big ones are on the API, and the Neve we call the direct output. On this board, SSL language for direct output. Excuse my handwriting sucks, equals channel output. So on this board, channel output and direct output, same thing. Some of the other language differences are a stereo aux send. On this board is called a queue, and a queue is called a foldback. Okay, and on the board it's just labeled as F, B, and on the patch bay and stuff. So that means that say you're on the API and you're using aux 7 and 8 to create a mix of your drums to send to the Avioms. On here you're going to be using QA, and let's say you're on the Neve and you're using aux 7 and 8 to make a drum mix to send to your Avioms. You're then either patching that directly into the Avioms, or say you wanted to send that into the queue system, you then assign aux 7 and 8 into Q1. Everyone know that, kind of, from your classes in the past 2 weeks if you're in 385, or from 385 last semester. Here, if you want your queue to go to like a Redco in the room, you have to assign your queue to the foldbacks. So that's just a terminology difference. It might sound confusing now, we'll get into it when we actually get there. Cool. And there are two foldbacks. So that means there's essentially two patch points in the live room for like Avioms. So in Studio 1 there's 4, Q1, 2, 3, 4. In Studio 2 there's 2 of them, Q1 and 2. Here there's 2 of them, foldback A and foldback B. Cool. So getting back to where I was, if I want to patch my studio loudspeakers so that I can talk to people in the room, which is usually my very first step here, I will patch foldback B out into SLS, and the patch points are directly above one another, which makes you think they might be normaled, but they are in fact not normaled. So it's pretty easy to find. You find foldback B and you patch it into SLS, which stands for studio loudspeakers. And then if I press the button on the console that says foldback B and I speak, my voice is coming out of the speakers over there. So that's step one. Really funny thing, there's foldback B. Next to that, there's a button that says discard. That button used to say foldback A. So that's the button that you press if you want to talk to foldback A. And I'll just keep mentioning this. Foldback A equals QA. Foldback B equals QB. So yeah, if I want to talk to foldback A, you press the button that says discard. And that's just because the button broke and tech didn't have the correct button, so they just put one that was the right size in there, but it's really confusing. I think we might print a label and stick it on there. That will probably be more useful for people. Okay, so foldback B into SLS, first step. All right, so Sid plugged a mic into which tie? 24. Okay, as with any studio here, you know, tie lines, patching it into a preamp. Pretty easy stuff. So from mic tie line 24, we're going to go into SSL channel in, I'm going to use 25. I generally like to keep, if I'm using a few mics, keep them in the center of the board so I can sit in the center of the stereo image when I'm working. That's just a workflow thing that I like to do. All right, so that mic is now hitting input 25 on the console. So let's go over the first way, which is probably the way that most of you are going to want to track in this room because you're used to that way, which is making this non-inline console mimic the Neve or the API and become an inline console. And that's in a mode that's called split mode. And that's confusing because how many of you remember in 340 there's a lab where you run the console in something called split mode, where you have level to tape on like the left-hand side of the board. So you use the large faders as channel path into Pro Tools, and then you return your signal on the right-hand side of the board as monitor path back from Pro Tools. Does everyone know that concept? Anyone unclear on that kind of way of doing things? Okay, so that's kind of another way I'll talk about later on the board. But that's confusing because usually we call that split mode. On this board, there is a function called split mode, but that actually does the opposite thing and turns it into inline mode. So let's do that. So split, equals in line. And this is probably what you're most used to. That's probably the way most of you are going to want to work in this room. I actually prefer to work the other way in here for reasons I'll explain later. And then if you want to talk about normal split mode on this board, I like to use the terminology side by side so that I don't get confused if I'm talking to people. If I'm like, I'm going to run the board in split, if I'm on this board, I know people know that means inline, and if I say I'm going to run it side by side, that means channel path, level to tape, monitor path, return from tape. Cool. So we're going to go over the inline workflow of the board first. Okay, I have a signal plugged into the preamp on channel 25. First things first, the way you route signals on this board, it's semi-digital. It's an analog console, but it has a digital routing matrix. So on the API and on the Neve, all the buses are at the top. If you're on the API, you hit bus 1 and it goes to Pro Tools input 1. If you're on the Neve, you hit a bus or you hit the direct output, and that happens on every single channel. On this board, it all happens from a central routing matrix. Something probably want to clear up again with terminology. I'm just going to put all the terminology things on the board as they come to mind. Is on the API, I'm just going to relate this to the other two boards as much as I can because it might be helpful. On the API, buses are normal to Pro Tools. So you hit a bus, it goes to Pro Tools. If you wanted to use the direct out, you have to patch direct out into Pro Tools. On the Neve, buses, which are also called groups, and direct outs are normal to Pro Tools. On this board, it's the opposite to the API. So the Neve has the best of both worlds. On this board, the direct outs, which are called the channel outputs, as I said earlier, are normal to Pro Tools. Sorry, channel output are normal to Pro Tools. So you're probably never going to use a bus. You probably never have to assign a bus. And the beautiful thing about this board is you also don't even have to push a button. You don't have to engage the direct outs. They just go to Pro Tools. This fader, 24, just goes to track 24 on Pro Tools. If you wanted to use a bus, you'd have to patch it, opposite to the API. Any questions? Anyone feeling very lost right now? Okay, cool. So now that that's cleared up, let's go through the signal flow. We have to play some music. I'm just gonna play some random shit. New arrivals. Cool. I'll get over routing like the Mac to the loudspeakers outside there later. For now, I'm just gonna do it. So I'm just sending signal out there, and we have a microphone set up out there so that we can hear it and make sure everything's working. All right. Cool. Sorry if the music sucks. I have no idea what title's gonna play. Okay, so this is the center section of the board right there. Okay. Right now, I'm talking about this section over here. So this is the central routing matrix. If you look at it, you'll notice it does look similar to what you see at the top of every channel strip on the API or the Neve. You have all the buses. There are 24 buses. You have a mix A assignment, mix B assignment, and a mix C assignment. Same terminology as the API. On the Neve, that would be mix plus 1 and 2, mix plus 3 and 4, mix plus 5 and 6. So mix bus assignments, and then some other shit over here that I'll talk about later. What you also have, which is also global across the board, and or not necessarily global, but assigned from the center section, is phantom power. Whether you're using the mic input or the line input or the bus as the input, which is the same as the Neve using the group input. This button called split, which is the important one we'll talk about. You can change the order of the dynamics on the channel strips, and you can change which meters you're looking at. And this can apply to one channel at a time, or it can apply globally across the whole board, okay? The way you utilize this matrix, you see this plus and minus button over here. If you hit those two together, it turns on. Right now it says 23 on it. It says the number that it's associated with on the board at that particular moment. So if it says 23 over here, let's move it over. I'm going to hit plus to move it over to 25. If 25 is highlighted and this matrix here on this little screen says 25, that means everything that I do over here is going to be related to channel 25, as if I was just hitting those buttons at the top of the channel strip on the Neve or the API. So if I want to assign channel 5 to mix A, I'll press mix A, and you'll see on the channel over here, it'll actually say mix A, which is really nice. You can kind of see where everything is going. So there's mix A on and off, mix B, mix C. If I wanted to assign it to a bus, you'll see bus 1 will come up over there, bus 2. So it shows you where everything is going. If I want to turn phantom power on, I hit 48 volts. A little light at the top of the channel strip. We're not looking at channel strip right now, but a little light will come on the channel strip. This is really stupid. I don't know why they don't have a switch for phantom power on each track, because it's really cumbersome. If like a mic's not working, you want to just quickly turn phantom power off to go and change the mic. You got to remember the central routing thing and finding the phantom switch and all that. So that's a little dumb. Yeah, and then all the other functionalities built in there. So what's nice though is that you don't actually have to go do that on a per channel basis. You don't have to go 25, do the stuff, 26, do the stuff, 27, do the stuff. You can do stuff globally. You can do stuff to a section of channels. There's many ways to do things all across the board. So that's awesome. So a little about navigating this center section here. The first thing I'm going to say is, remember, hit plus and minus to turn it on and off. After you perform any move, I highly recommend pressing plus and minus to turn it off, because otherwise you might be trying to do something on a different channel and a previous channel is still selected, and now you've just turned phantom power onto a Coles and fucked something up, or, you know, so always turn it off, and then the next move you do, you'll be starting from scratch. So I'd suggest that. So if you wanted to configure the whole board and assign it all to mix A, hit plus and minus to turn the routing matrix on, and then there's a button that says select. So you press select, it'll start flashing. Below that, there's a button that says all, hit all, and you'll notice the whole board just became highlighted. Can you see that? There's a little white box around every single channel. Now, if I hit mix A, the whole board is assigned to mix A. Cool. I'll deassign that. If I want to select a channel, I don't have to turn it on and then go minus, 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 or plus, plus, plus. So let's put it on that side so you guys can all see. You know, I can do that to move my channels around, but that'll take a while. I can actually, there's a button at the bottom of each channel strip that says select. I can just press that button, and then I have the channel selected, 24, and this changes to 24, 17, and this changes to 17. Be careful because there's two select buttons. All right, so the select button at the bottom, be careful because there's also a select button over here at the top of the channel strip, which is a much, I'll show you when it loads. The select button at the top is a much more obvious select button. It's a big button that says select. That has to do with using this board as a control surface for Pro Tools. So that's not the select button you want to use, it's the one at the bottom. You'll notice if I'm selecting stuff using those buttons, if everyone can kind of see the meter bridge, every time I hit select, it's one channel at a time. And that's cool if you just need to do one thing. However, earlier, I turned the matrix on, I hit select and all, and it selected the whole board. If I just hit select and not all, you'll see the select button is now flashing. And now every time I hit a new channel, it is cumulative. they don't turn off. So now I've got 16, 21, 22, 23, 27. So now they stay all selected, and anything I do in the center will happen to those channels. So that's very useful if you've got your mics in, you've gone select all, assigned everything to mix A, and now you want to put phantom power on all your mics that have phantom. Turn the matrix on, hit select, and just go, okay, so that's the kick, the FET47 on the kick out, the overheads, the vocal mic, sweet, 48 volts. Phantom is now going to all of the channels I had selected. Makes sense? Cool. Great. Then one more workflow thing with navigating the center thing. If I select a channel, I'm going to select channel 1. Channel 1 is now selected, and then I hit this button over here which says 2, and then I hit another channel, let's say 24, it now selects 1 to 24. So you can also select like a group of channels like that. That's useful for putting the board in side-by-side mode, where one half of the console will be mic input, level to tape, and the other side will be line input returned from Pro Tools. So that's really useful for that kind of navigation. Any questions on that? Do you want me to reiterate anything? Does anyone feel lost? Yes, go last.
Can you repeat the last thing I was writing?
Sure. Okay, I'll just quickly go over all of the functions of this again. So to turn it on and off, plus and minus together. If you want to do something to the whole board, you turn it on, you hit select all, the whole thing becomes selected. If you want to do something...
Phantom power when you say it?
Say again?
You mean phantom power when you say it? Turn it?
I don't know, I mean turn the routing matrix on. You can't really see it from there, but you'll see that this little screen is off right now, and if I press anything, nothing's happening. If I press plus and minus together, I turn the matrix on, and then I can start actually selecting channels and doing stuff.
Gotcha.
So plus and minus turn it on. If I hit select all, the whole channel. If I turn it on and then hit just select, so the select button is flashing, then every channel I hit will be cumulative and they'll all stay selected. If I turn it off, select a certain channel and press 2 and then select another channel, it'll select everything between those two channels. Cool. And then once you've done what you need to do, assign to mix A, always hit plus and minus to turn it off so that you don't think you're doing something to one channel later, but there's still a whole bunch of stuff selected that you are unaware of. Okay, cool. Let me deselect everything that I just assigned to mix A.
Where's Phantom again?
Phantom is over here, in the center section.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you'll once you anything that's selected, if you hit that 48 volts, that will have phantom power. And that is probably the stupidest thing about this board. And there's some other buttons, and I'll get onto those later if we have time to get into the deeper workflow. I'll go over some of the other buttons on that matrix. Some awesome stuff that makes things really fast. Okay. Now let's actually run signal. So, I have a mic coming in on 25. I'm going to set up the whole board as if we had mics coming in everywhere, because that's probably what you're going to be doing most of the time. It'll be faster just to set it up globally. So I'll plus and minus turn it on, select all. Do we want line input or mic input going into the console? Mic input, cool. So we hit mic, and you'll see here on each channel strip, let me just see if I've got this open yet. Cool, let me just find it. So this is what the meter bridge looks like. If it says channel input, that means the mic input. If it says monitor input, that means the line input. So because I hit mic everywhere, you'll see on the meter bridge it says channel input. If I hit line, it'll say monitor input and it'll be green. So see it's blue for monitor, green for channel. Okay, so now it's mic input across the board. Now we need to talk about split mode, which is where things might feel complicated for a second. So because this is not an inline console, there's not channel path and monitor path. There's only one fader. We need to figure out a way to get the signal into Pro Tools and then back to the large fader so that you have the ability to move the large faders around undestructively as you do in the other rooms. And that's called split mode, and they call it split mode confusingly compared to normal split mode on other boards, but they call it split mode here because you're splitting the channel strip in half vertically. So in other words, the signal's coming into the preamp, and then you're deciding, I'm going to split it here, I'm going to take the signal from the preamp, send it straight to Pro Tools, so preamp straight to Pro Tools, and then it's going to return back into the same channel strip, or a different one if you chose that, but there'd be no reason to do that, into the same channel strip after the preamp. So in this workflow, it would come from the preamp, go to Pro Tools, and then return just before the dynamics. So that means you'd be recording the signal completely clean of any processing. When it comes back in, if you choose to compress it or EQ it, that will all be in the monitor path. If you turn up the fader, that's just the monitor path fader. Any questions on that?
So if you decide to do that, all the processing you're gonna do is everything gonna be
In the monitor path on the board mix.
Okay.
I'll tell you how to change it to not be that way as well. So this is where terminology is stupid again on the SSL. Well, I'll get to that actually in a second. So I still have everything selected. I've selected mic, so channel input on everything. Now I need to put everything into split mode. And so it's that button over there that says split. So if I hit split mode right now, it's actually not engaging. You would see some things change on the meter bridge if it was engaging. That's because, and this is when you find this board in its normal state, the channel output on the center section here will be set to post fader. And that defines the position in the signal flow that you're taking that signal and sending it to Pro Tools. If that is post fader, there is no way to split that channel, if that makes sense, because the signal's coming into the preamp, it's going through the dynamics, it's going through the EQ, and then it's going through the fader. And then if the channel output is post fader, that just means it's going to Pro Tools after the fader. There's no way to split it. You're right at the end of the signal flow already. Make sense? If I change that to being either pre-fader or at the input, the board will allow me to go into split mode. So right now I'm gonna hit input, this one over here. The meter bridge will show you that that's happened. It'll go input to channel output. And then if I hit the split button, a thing happens and the meter bridge changes and you know it's gone into split mode. And here's the terminology weird thing. We're splitting it at the input. SSL calls the input to the channel strip at the dynamics, not at the preamp. So in other words, you're taking the preamp, it's going straight to Pro Tools, and it's taking it from the input to the channel and then coming back in at the dynamics section. If I select pre-fader, that means I'm taking the signal, it's going into the preamp, it's going through the compressor, it's going through the EQ, and then pre-fader, it's splitting off and going to Pro Tools, and then coming back at the beginning of the fader. So that means that all of the processing will be going to Pro Tools. Any questions? I know this gets a little deep.
Can we change the preamp?
Can you change the preamp?
I mean, if we can route it through other preamp.
What do you mean?
I mean, just to try the different coloring of.
Oh, like an external preamp.
Like output
Yeah.
here.
Oh
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's not really related to this console. As with any console, you can do that by either like plugging it into like the 1073, or was that a 1084, whatever that one is, going from the preamps directly into Pro Tools, or going into the line input on the console and then sending that into Pro Tools. So yeah, you can totally do that. But I won't get too much into that now because that's going to be a little confusing.
So another level control for Pro Tools is your preamp, basically.
Yes, and there is also a line trim after the preamp. So let's find a...
If you're in input mode, would that include the line trim?
Yes.
Okay.
Input. So the input to the channel strip is at the beginning of the dynamics section. So it's
beginning.
preamp into line trim, Pro Tools, and back. But the line trim is that it's a line trim. It's not a fader that goes to -1 infinity. It's minus 20 dB to plus 20 dB. So that means that if like there's no muting the small fader, there's no turning the small fader off, and I'll talk about why that's important in a second, but let's just quickly show you what that looks like. So there's the gain for the preamp. This is a cool little thing I'll tell you about later. And this is the line trim. You'll see -20, plus 20. So if you're in split mode at the input, signal will come into the preamp. You'll be able to set the, if you want the preamp really hot because you like the distortion, but you don't want to clip Pro Tools, you can then turn the line trim down.
So that's the
small fader.
Okay.
That's essentially the small fader, but you can't mute it and you can't turn it right off, so it's not quite a small fader. Usually people just leave that at unity and just get the level from the preamp. but yeah. So if you're in split mode at the input, it'll go microphone, preamp, line trim. Then from here, it'll go to Pro Tools, it'll record, and it'll come back at the compressor, and then you can do everything else in the monitor path. If you're in split mode, but instead of splitting at the input, so when I say splitting at, that's defining where the channel output is, so where the direct output is in the signal flow. Instead of that being at the input, if you put that pre-fader over here, then that means it's coming in, going through the preamp, going through the line trim, going through the compressor, going through the gates, going through the EQs, and after all of that, it's off to Pro Tools, and then coming back in, and then you just have level and panning control on the board. Everything else will be printing to Pro Tools. So what's cool about this is that you can also have it in split mode at the input, do your thing, do a little bit of EQing on one channel, and then you're like, sick, that's nice. I want to print that. Select just that channel and change it from splitting at the input to splitting pre-fader, and now all of that processing will be printing to Pro Tools. So if you want to commit, you just change one channel to splitting pre-fader. So that's kind of like on the API, if you use the EQs and then you hit the EQ button next to the small fader to move the EQ into the channel path, or on the Neve, you'd have the EQ switch pressed in next to the small fader to put the EQ in the monitor path, and then you like it, so you disengage that to put it in the channel path. That's what that's doing. Okay?
What does the split button do at the bottom of that strip?
It does the same thing that the global split button does. So some of the functionality can only be done from the center, like putting on phantom power, like changing the channel meters, like defining where the channel output is. But some of the functionality can also happen on each channel, and because they're digital buttons, if you do it from the center section, it'll engage the actual button on the channel, so you can do it either at the channel or at the center section. But the split button is a weird one to include on every channel strip, because you'll always be doing that globally. There's very rare circumstances where you'd only be wanting that on one channel. You'd rather want just fucking phantom power on one channel, but they decided to put the split mode thing on one channel, so that's dumb. But you can also change whether you're having mic or line on an individual basis by hitting the source select button. But if I were you, I'd rather you get well acquainted with this system, because you have no choice but to use the system. So you may as well rather just learn this well and do it all from here. And then as you get more comfortable, you can start doing stuff on a channel by channel basis. Yeah.
About that button, the split button on the channel strip.
Yeah.
So when I hit it, it just toggle from input to pre-fader?
No, that just turns split mode on and off. So.
And then I still need to go back in the summer section.
Don't use the split button on the channel. Forget about it. Do it all from here.
Okay.
Yeah, here's the split button here. So if you have split off, if you're not using split at all that means that you have one channel path. You have the signal coming in from the preamp or from the line input from Pro Tools, and it just goes down to the large fader. The large fader is assigned to a mix bus, and it's just like mix down mode. That's just like a mix thing, or if you have it in side by side, we'll talk about that. What split mode does is divides it in half vertically, takes the Pro Tools, returns it. And it's the selecting channel output to be at the input or pre-fader. That's what chooses whether you've got the processing in the channel path or the monitor path.
So
yeah.
if you...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So the split input is the one that goes to Pro Tools and then returns at the EQ and everything.
At wherever you've defined it, whether
Yeah.
that's at the inputs or pre-fader.
Okay.
And
the pre-fader runs through all the processing before going to Pro Tools.
Yeah, and it's logical if you think about it. If you think pre-fader, it's just before the fader, so everything else.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, if it's at the input, it's just before the input to the channel minus the preamp. Okay. Cool. Alrighty, so let's do that on channel 25 then. So, well, I did it across the board. That's what I was going to do. Select all. We already went. We're in split mode. You guys can't see it, but we are in split mode. We have the channel output split at the input, which means it goes preamplifier, line trim to Pro Tools and back. Channel meters, you'd usually want the monitor return so that you can see the levels the same as they are in Pro Tools, so you know if you're clipping Pro Tools or not. And then you're going to want to assign all of the large faders to, well, the faders, there's only one fader, to mix A, so that you can hear everything. So you hit mix A, and now the whole board is configured to be used. So now I want phantom power only on this channel. So I'm going to hit the select button at the bottom. Oh, now I can show you this because we have a second manual up. This is the select button you want to use, right at the bottom of the fader, not the select button. The select button has got to do with the Pro Tools control surface function of this console, because this console can control Pro Tools. So I'm going to hit the select button at the bottom. Channel 25 is now selected, and I'm going to hit 48 volts. You'll see the phantom just came on because it bounced around. I think I'm still playing music. We're seeing level here on the meters. If I turn the preamp up, we'll see more level. I already made a Pro Tools session where I made the input 25, output 25, so we see signal in Pro Tools. The fader is up. I'm turning the control room level up. We're not hearing anything. Everything is assigned to mix A. Here's another really stupid thing. I said earlier this was my favorite console, and it is, but there are still lots of stupid things.
Yeah.
So there is one master fader. All of these are VCA groups, which we'll talk about later when we get to the deeper stuff. These are not master faders. There is one master fader, but there are 3 mix buses, which is weird because on the API there's a master fader for mix bus A, B, and C, and a grandmaster. On the Neve there's mix bus 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, yeah, there's only one, but this board is all digital and stuff, so this one fader is actually 3 faders, and you can choose what you're dealing with at any point. And this is why I know Mark Wessel always makes this joke that this board is called the Duality, because you're often pressing more than one switch at a time, and this is the first instance of that happening. If you want this fader to be the master fader for mix A, use this little matrix over here. You see this column is mix A, this column is mix B, and this column is mix C. So this little switch at the bottom here, if you hold that down, then any switch that you press here does that to mix A. Make sense? So I'm going to hold down this switch here, and then here this one says fader, it's very small. So if I hold down this one and this one together, this fader button is now red, and as I raise this fader, I'm now raising the master fader. Let me just... Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you say that one more time? Like,
Yes.
through that matrix to
Yeah.
mix A?
Yeah. So it just also demonstrates, if I now hold down mix A and the fader button at the same time, this fader will shoot down to 0. It's off now, but the mix A fader is still on. This fader is just a representation of the level of mix A, okay? So now if I do it again, the fader will shoot up because my level is at full. If I hold down the mix B associated button and then hit fader, it'll go down again because mix B level is off. If I put mix B to half, if you guys can kind of see this fader, I'm going to toggle between mix A and mix B. So here's mix A is at full. Here's mix B is at half. Here's mix C is all the way down. Make sense? One fader for 3 mixes. Cool. Any questions on that? Yes.
I'm just wondering because I can't really see what's labeled up there.
So yeah, that is really
I'm
small.
just wondering, like, what are the other options they could do for the listening options? Like,
Yes.
assigning mix
It says, so it says the only one you're really going to use most of the time is probably the one that says fader, and then the one here that says comp. Because if I hold down this and comp, the SSL G comp, which is on the board, is now placed over mix A. So you're now using the bus compression on mix A. So if you hold down mix A and comp, this will become yellow, and that means you can turn the G comp on and you can use it, and you can use bus compression on the board without patching anything. So that's really nice. The other stuff, this just says plus 10 dB. They'll just add 10 dB to mix A. This says insert on the patch bay. This one you might use on the patch bay. There's like mix bus insert send, mix bus insert return. So if you wanted to use a different bus compressor or like a stereo EQ of your mix bus, you patch that in, and then you can put the insert in or out. That's really nice. You can't do that on the API or the Neve. You put the compressor on and it's on. You can't AB it unless you do some wizardry and return the output to an external or something. But anyway, the one above says, well, let's start here. The one at the top says sum. It actually doesn't say sum. It has the little Latin insignia for sum. And I mean, this is deep workflow, so I don't know if I should talk about it, but sum basically means if you use the insert send and you say you have a compressor patched across the insert send and you have sum engaged, it will actually blend the dry signal and the compressor together, so you can do parallel compression on the mix bus. There's no level control for it. You'd have to control the level using the output of the outboard gear, and then post just moves where that sum is happening, whether it's pre-fader or post-fader. And if it's post-fader, obviously the master fader then becomes irrelevant. Anyway, let's not get into that. Anyway, that's what all of those do. You can also then send mix A into mix B, or send mix B into mix A and send mix C into mix A using the button that says 2A, so you can sum them all together if you wanted to. But that's also not really something you're ever going to really need to use. Any questions? A lot of the stuff I just said is not important. And why does this not want to? Because I'm being stupid, that's why. None of the stuff I just said is that important. The important part is holding down mix A and then holding down fader so that you can actually see your master fader. Okay.
Can you patch mix A into Pro Tools to print it?
Yes, you can. I'll talk about that after we... Actually, maybe now's a good time to talk about that. So, yeah, I always print a board mix. You might not always print a board mix. That's up to you. But yeah, I always patch mix A, and that's also confusing because all of the terminology on the patch bay is different at every layer. So if you use like the insert send for mix A, it is labeled left and right of a 5.1 system. The insert return is also labeled left and right of a 5.1 thing, whereas the mix output is labeled mix 1 left, mix 1 right, which is weird because it's called mix A, and before that we were talking about 5.1 stuff, and it's all very stupid, but doesn't matter because it's all in line. So just it's the if you're using mix A, if you want to like plug it into Pro Tools. Oh, and there's two levels of that. There is actually one that says mix A left and right. They both are the same patch point. So let me just shut up and say, if you want to print your board mix, patch from, it's a little yellow tab close to the bottom of the patch bay. It says 5.1 mix out, and there are 6 patch points, and it's A left, A right, B left, B right, C left, C right. So obviously you patch from 5.1 mix out, A left, A right, and that's mix A left and right, and you patch it straight into your Pro Tools input, and they are labeled pretty normally Avid HDIO channel input. So you go straight into like Pro Tools inputs 1 and 2 if you're not using 1 and 2, or 47 and 48, however you like to do that, and that'll be printing your board mix.
Wait, say it again. Sorry, what's the name of the
5.1 mix out, A left, A right. And there's another set of patch points that is actually the exact same patch point. And there's a whole bunch of other stupid shit.
Can I ask one more question? But
yes.
I don't know if it's... is there any way, for example, you're sending to mix A post large fader, right? When you're sending to mix A.
When you're sending to mix A.
Yeah, when you engage mix A, it's basically a post. It's after the large faders, right? It's summing up the monitor path.
After the, yeah, well, it is after the, yeah, because it's the mix bus, yeah.
Is there any way to send to mix B pre-fader? Like to send the inputs to mix B so you can use the compressor and print the compressed signal?
To send the large faders to mix B.
Let's say like I have drums, for example, in 1 to 8, and I want to send pre-fader to mix B to put the SSL comp and then send it to Pro Tools.
But you still want some sort of level control of the signal.
So
you probably use
trims,
like
the gain and the trims, and then you go to mix B.
So you want to not have your level that you've created on the large faders being the level going to the compressor.
The reason I don't want them to be post is because it will be like a phase difference, like it will be timing difference when you print.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, so let me think about that. I mean, I'd say then you use a stereo cue and you put that in the channel path. And you might already be using your cue, but there's actually ways to get 24 individual effect sends or 12 stereo effects sends aside from the actual cues on the board using a whole deep thing called EFX, which I'll talk about later. So that would probably be the best way to do that, or to run the board in side-by-side mode.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Where was I? Stereo mix. Okay, cool. So the one thing I haven't spoken about is the center section in general, like what we're listening to. Okay? So, do I need to just quickly run through all the steps to get to where we were real quick in like sequential order? Would that be helpful? Okay. So, you get to the room. You hit the plus and minus. You hit select plus and minus. You hit select all. You make everything mic input. You choose your channel output to be either input or pre-fader. If it is set post-fader, the board won't let you split because there's no way to split. So you have to first select either input or pre-fader. Input means all the processing is in the monitor path. Pre-fader means all the processing is in the channel path. Then you hit split, and then you can assign everything to mix A. And then you can select the channel, put on phantom power, whatever, raise the gain, raise the fader, hit mix A, fader, turn the master fader up. And then where this board is slightly different, it doesn't have like the API and the Neve have internal and external, and then like either monitoring the grandmaster or you're monitoring mix A or an aux send. This is the only selection you have. And it's either to monitor mix A, or to monitor something called the stereo mix, or to monitor external A or external B. And that's it. And this over here, this will sum the board to mono. If you were working in 5.1, this would sum your 5.1 to stereo. And then this is like the solo clear. I don't know why that's over here. It's like not part of that, but it is over there. This you probably will never use because you'll never plug headphones in here. This is what you're sending to headphones. This can booby trap you, and I'll talk about that in a second. But firstly, for the simplest workflow, just press the mix A button. And if everything is assigned to mix A and your mix A fader is up, and you turn it up, then you'll be hearing it. Okay? Yes.
If you are like, let's say you're using like FX sends, would those also be printed if you're in pre-fader mode, if you're in split?
Yes, because if you were to say go into the Bricasti, and you were to patch the output of the Bricasti to a pair of large channels, like you would on the API, you would be patching it into the line input, obviously, because it's a line level signal. The line input when you're in split mode is the same as the return from Pro Tools. So it would automatically go to the large fader, which would be assigned to mix A. It's the same patch point. So Pro Tools is normal. The output of Pro Tools is normal to the line input. And when you're in split mode, it makes the mic input go to the preamp to Pro Tools, and then where you return, it's the line input returns into wherever that point is defined on the board, if that makes sense. So if you patch the Bricasti into like line input 19 and 20, that means it's gonna appear on these large faders 19 and 20. You don't have to change any sort of configuration. It's all Gucci.
If you, let's say you you're recording 2 vocal tracks and you're sending them to Bricasti through like the FX sends.
Yeah.
Would the Bricasti get printed on the vocal tracks if you're if you're in pre-fader mode, in the split mode?
Not on the vocal tracks, because the Bricasti, remember, is it's just the return that you're listening to. Cool. You know, it's not actually integrated into the signal going.
So even if you're in that pre-fader mode where you're printing onboard stuff, it doesn't count if you're using outboard.
Well, so there's a difference between like using an effects send to a reverb as opposed to patching a compressor across a channel.
Yeah,
cool. But no, it'll be fine.
So
and if you did want to print your reverb, you would, I mean, I don't think I'm going to explain that because I see a lot of people printing reverb around, and I think that comes from in 340, we're always like, one of the things that we're told to do is print reverb as an exercise. but I don't think it's actually a very useful thing, and it's complicated to do here, and I think how many of us actually use the reverb after the case? Probably no one. So like, yeah, don't print your reverb. It's complicated, you know, unless you really love the reverb. If you're like, fuck, this Bricasti sound is awesome and I don't have that plug-in at home and I really want to use it, by all means print the reverb. But I'm not going to tell you all how to do that right now, because that just means reconfiguring a channel strip to have the line input go into Pro Tools, or actually very easily just patching the output of the reverb into Pro Tools. That's the easy way to do it. Not that hard, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
To do cues, how do you send it?
I'm gonna get there in a second. I just want to quickly make sure we are not going to run into any trouble in the center section, because there are some booby traps. So the things to watch out for are the control room level. All these buttons here are encoders that say what this master thing is controlling. If none of these are lit up, then this is just the level of the speakers. And this is what you have to watch out for, because you might walk in here and someone has pressed this switch at the top which says dim. That is not the dim switch. This is the dim switch. But the one that says dim, this is where you set the level of your dim. So if I have dim selected and then I move this little thing in the middle, this LED screen will come on. So right now I will set my dim to -12. Let me turn it up. Interesting. Now if I hit dim, hit dim to -12. If I hit dim, change the dim level. Now the dim is less. So that's a booby trap, because you might be like, okay, let me turn the master let me turn the control room master up, and you're not hearing anything. It's because you're not actually maybe turning the master up, you're turning the dim level up because that happens to be selected. Or AFL is selected and then you're turning up the level of your solo bus. Or PFL is selected, or solo in place, or headphones. So this is where you basically adjust the level of various internal buses. So watch out for that. Make sure none of them are selected, and then it is your control room level. This is simple. This is where you select which monitors you're listening to. If nothing is selected, it's the mains. If Mini B is selected, and this is backwards, it's the SEM25s, the ATCs. If Mini A is selected, it's the NS10s. Nothing too complicated there. Okay, so mix A is what you'll usually be listening to. I'll get into the stereo mix in a bit once we start getting into a bit more deeper stuff. Externals are probably something you guys are all going to need to use. External B is, see here it says external B. So these encoders over here, if I hit external A, these little screens will light up and they will display names. It says CDR, 2-track, DVD, whatever. If I hit external B, it says iPod, Mac, DVD. So if I select external B and then I select iPod, which is this one, you can't see it right now because this is Mac and this is iPod. So if I want to plug my phone in, I select iPod, and then if I hit external B here, that's what I'll be hearing, okay? So this is where you define what external A is. So is external A the CD player, or is it the return from the 2-track machine? External B, is external B the iPod, or is it the output of the Mac? And then you hit external B to actually monitor that, okay? So I think that's, and then obviously if you have external B, you're not going to be hearing your 2 mix anymore. You're going to need to switch back to mix A. So that's like hitting control room play, control room program on the API, or internal, external on the Neve. Okay, any questions? So, cues, and then once I go through these cues, I'm not going to talk about talkbacks right now. I'll talk about talkbacks after. I'm going to finish up the simple workflow, and then I'll talk about talkbacks and stuff like that. I'm going to just go through this, then quickly run through all the steps again to get a session going, and then we'll go into the deeper stuff, okay? So cues run things from multi-track return, or it's called, what's it called here? Avid HDIO outputs. It's a green strip, same as the Neve rooms, it's a green strip. So obviously Avioms, just patch from the associated Pro Tools output. So if you want the vocal to come up on the Aviom, it's the same shit. If the vocal's on 25, patch Pro Tools output 25 into Aviom input 1, and there's your vocal. That's not complicated. Now the one thing is obviously if you have drums and you want the drums coming up on just a stereo pair on the Avioms. So channel 1 and 2 on the Avioms is the drums. Either you can do the Pro Tools thing where you make a physical send, and I know they don't actually really teach this. I haven't at all the professors at Berklee, but most people don't do it this way. You know, if these are your drum tracks, you can obviously just put some sends on some unused, say 47, 48, and then just turn them all up and make your drum mix. Patch 47 and 48 into Aviom 1 and 2. And there's your pre-fader drum mix. So that's one way to do it. And also, obviously, if you need a sum, like say there's a keyboard player with 6 keyboards, you know, send them all to the same Aviom channel. They don't need each keyboard separately. But you can also use the cues on the board. Okay, so on this board there are 4 mono effects sends and 1 stereo cue send. They're all, as I said earlier, Q, stereo aux is a Q, mono aux, so let me just add this here, effects, oh wait, I'm doing this the other way around. Mono aux, I can't spell, what the hell? Mono aux is effects, so that's just a terminology difference. You know, on the API, aux send 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are 6 mono aux sends. Aux send 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 3 stereo aux sends. Here you've got 4 mono aux sends that are called effect sends, and 1, but actually 2, I'll explain that in a second, stereo aux sends, which are called Q sends. So that's just a terminology difference, but there is a slight difference in that the 4 effect sends by default are post fader, and the stereo Q send by default is pre fader, and that makes sense because usually you want your cues to be pre fader, and usually you want your effects to be post fader. So these are the things about this board that I think are awesome. There's not a lot of button presses. Like, you want to send to a reverb, you literally, you know, press it to turn it on and turn it up, and it's going to your reverb. You don't have to go like post fader or pre-fader, like on master, whatever. So yeah. Anyway, so let's just talk about making a drum mix on the board for now. So you would obviously go to every channel that has every element of your drums, or maybe just kick, snare, overheads, and you press the green one in, which is level, to turn it on. And if I hit it in, a little light next to the on thing there will come on, it'll become orange. And then here's your panning. So obviously you pan your overhead left to the left, overhead right to the right. And that's it. There are masters for the, so here's the stereo cue master in the center section up here. It is on and at unity by default. You don't have to turn the master on and up, it is just on and up. That's what's also awesome about this board. Much less button pushes. So he has the stereo QA, stereo QB, which we'll talk about, and he has the FX 1, 2, 3, and 4. So those are essentially your aux masters. So if you're making your drum mix, obviously, turn it on, turn it up, do your panning, and then just patch QA into Aviom input 1 and 2. QA left and right, Aviom input 1 and 2, and there you have it. If you want to hear what your drum mix sounds like, if you want to monitor it out of these speakers while you're making it, this is also slightly different to the Neve and the API, because it doesn't have, you know, the Neve has internal sources, then you hit mix 1 and mix 2, or aux 7 and 8, the API has control room program, you hit mix A, mix B, grandmaster, aux 7 and 8. Here, there are actually solo switches by the masters to all of this stuff. So, and those solo switches are called AFL, after fader listen, because they're after fader level switches. So if I want to hear what I'm doing, I just hit this little AFL button next to stereo QA, and that's basically soloing QA. So I can just check, okay, how's my level going to the Avioms with the drum kits? Is my kick drum and snare drum and overheads good? Is the balance good?
Where is that again?
Next to the master for the Q. So there's the stereo Q master in the center section, and there's the AFL button.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. So, one more time. You press this in to turn it on, the little light will come on, and then you just set your level and your panning, patch QA left, QA right into Aviom inputs 1 and 2, or whichever ones you want, and make your drum mix. And the last thing I'll say as part of the basics, this feels like it's not very basics anymore, is if you were not wanting to use Avioms and you want to use Redcos because you might be in here just tracking vocals and you don't need to give your singer control over everything, and you want to just use a Redco, use QA the same way, turn it on, turn it up, make the mix you want to send to the headphones. But QA does not go to the QA, even, well, it says Q1 on the wall outside. The 5-pin place to patch the Redco says Q1. QA doesn't go to Q1. QA goes nowhere. QA, either you patch it into the Avioms or you assign it into Foldback A. Foldback A goes to Q1. Okay? Cool.
By default?
Yes, that goes to the patch points on the wall, yeah. Foldback A is normal to those patch points. Foldback B goes to Q2. Not patch points, tie lines. And you have to assign QA to Foldback A. And that's the same as the workflow on the Neve. On the Neve, you make a drum mix or something using aux 7 and 8. Or, well, I keep saying drum mix. You make a Q mix using aux 7 and 8. And then you want to send that to Q1. In the center section of the Neve, you hit aux 7 and 8, right? And you turn it up. It's the same shit here in the center section of the board. Here's your foldback masters. Foldback again is SSL terminology for Q. Remember, Q is just a stereo aux. Foldback is a Q. Okay. And here you just press the button that says QA, you turn it up, and then you turn up your master. Okay? And then it's going to go to the Redco outputs in the room. And then if you want to listen to that, there's also an AFL button here. So you can hit the AFL button to solo the Q. But if you've done this all right and your gain staging is good and that's all you're sending, if you hit this AFL and this AFL, they'll be the exact same thing, because this is soloing what you're sending to QA. Now you're sending QA to Foldback A, so you'll be hearing the same thing if you hit either one of those buttons. And those can also be traps because they're tiny and there's no LED attached to them, so they might be engaged and you're not hearing anything on your 2 mix, so watch out for those. If anything, just if you're not hearing stuff, make sure the solo clear light will be yellow if something's soloed, so just hit solo clear, because those are hard to spot sometimes. Yeah?
How did you assign QA to Foldback A again?
In the Foldback master, it says QA over here, so you just press that and then turn up. So QA would be the mix 1, because you can mix stuff together. You can have a mixture of QA and stereo mix and then get a balance.
If you want to do the QA through the AFL, do you have to hit AFL on the center section anywhere else, or is it the moment you hit it?
The moment you hit it. The only AFL thing on the center section is this one here, and that's just defining how loud your AFL bus is. Which is something you're probably going to have to actually change, because usually for some reason I come in here and I solo something and it's 5 times as loud as it was in my mix because the solo bus is set really loud. So that's how you just turn your solo bus down. The other really important thing that will booby trap you, and I'm going to build this into my preset because I came in here and it was wrong the other day, so I'll change this if you are using the presets, which is something I'll go over after this. This AFL/PFL button here, this is where you globally decide how your solo matrix is working. This function exists on the API and the Neve as well. You know, you define where the stuff is destructive, or AFL or PFL or latching or momentary, you know, all of that stuff. That's all if you hit AFL, PFL. So by the way, these buttons and these little tiny LED screens right here are just, they control many things based on what you hit above. If you press external A, this is where you define what external A is. If you hit AFL, PFL, these become a whole bunch of controls to define how your solos are working. So right now if I have AFL pressed, I have the options to have my solos be AFL or PFL or solo in place, which is destructive. ISO, alt, a whole bunch of other shit, don't know what they all do. Make sure it's on AFL if it's not, because otherwise you might have destructive solos and you might solo something and then your channel output cuts to Pro Tools and then you no longer are tracking the stuff that you're supposed to be tracking. Yes, Josh.
Before we get too far from the foldback, can we talk about like talkbacks going to Avioms?
Yes. Yeah, I'll only talk about for now, just getting the control room talkback to the Aviom. We'll talk about musician talkbacks after that. Okay, so this is one of the other first things I do in the room, is I use foldback A to get the talkback to the Aviom. So that's a patch, and I just go foldback A left into an Aviom input. And then, remember that stupid button earlier that says discard?
Yeah.
That's my talkback to foldback A. So this is the same as the Neve. You know, you patch Q4 left into the Avioms, and then you hit Q4, and then you talk to Q4. All I'm doing is patching foldback A, so like Q1 left into the Avioms, and then I hold down this foldback A button to talk to it, which doesn't say foldback A, it says discard. Okay? And then foldback B I have reserved to talk to the studio loudspeakers. Remember I patched that at the beginning? So foldback A will talk to the Avioms, foldback B will talk to the studio loudspeakers. Just one thing that might feel confusing now, because I was talking about sending QA into foldback A, all that. That's for a Redco workflow, right? You're using a Redco, and that's your Q mix. So so then that makes sense. You'll just press foldback A and talk to the Redco, and your mix will be going to the Redco. In an Aviom workflow, the only thing you're using foldback A for is the talkback. Okay? If you're using drums going to QA for the Aviom mix, that's not actually touching the foldback. You're just patching QA into the Avioms, because QA is just a stereo aux send that doesn't go anywhere unless you patch it somewhere. Okay? Does this all make sense? Any questions?
You just mentioned the discard button for just.
Discard is just tech replaced this button that says foldback A with a button that says discard.
Okay. I was looking for it.
Yeah.
Are the cues pre-fader?
The cues are pre-fader by default. You can change them to post-fader if you want to. And the FX sends are post-fader by default, but you can change them to pre-fader if you want to. Yeah, and so just remember everything, all the masters are always on and up. Q masters up, FX masters are up.
If we're using talkback to foldback A, do we need to do anything in the foldback master section?
No, so your foldback master doesn't even have to be up for you. Your talkback will go there regardless. Your talkback level is just this one over here, talkback to foldback. So you can just patch it. You don't even have to turn it on or up. Okay. You always have to turn it on and up if you're assigning QA into foldback A to make a Redco mix. Then this is the master of that whole mix. But your control room talkback level, when you press the talkback button or the button that says discard, is independent of any master control. It's just controlled from the talkback to foldback button over here. Talkback out is not talkback to the loudspeakers. That's just a patch point. You will never use that.
So wait, what is the patch in there? You have to do that patching for you to like speak.
To speak to the speakers, to the control room speakers, I patched foldback B to studio loudspeakers.
Okay.
So that means foldback A, or the discard button, talks to the headphones. Foldback B talks to the studio loudspeakers, because I patched it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So fallback A is normal.
No.
Like
I patched it. Fallback A. Fallback A is normal to the Redco outputs if you're using Redcos, but right now we're talking Avioms.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Okay, any questions? I'm gonna do a quick run through of every little step to get to this point, as if I was running a session, and then those of you whose brains are exploding are welcome to leave, and then I'll dive into some slightly more complex things, of which there are many. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna normal the all of this that I just did, all the turning ons and stuff, let me just tell you how to access the template. So there were already templates on this board, but they were all fucked up and weird, so last semester I built my own ones and deleted the old weird ones, and I hope no one gets mad at me for that, but and I've been updating them this semester because I came back and they were all weird again. So try to remember all of this stuff, because as I said earlier, if you're going to rely on the recall, you're going to be lost if something goes bad, and studio ops do not all know how this board works. Only some people do, so you can't rely on them coming to help you. You're kind of on your own in this room. This little screen in the middle is where you access a bunch of the other stuff. By the way, one of the biggest things, everyone see this little blue switch over here?
Mm-hmm.
I was just about to ask you about that too, yeah.
Yeah, okay. This board is either an analog board and a full analog board, or it's a Pro Tools control surface. If this blue button is engaged, it's an analog board, and everything I'm talking about applies. If I hit it, those faders just came up. Those faders are now my Pro Tools faders.
Wow.
So with that blue button disengaged, you're going to struggle to run signal in here. So just make sure the blue button's on, and don't worry too much about the Pro Tools control surface side of things. It's a shitty Pro Tools control surface because it doesn't use Yukon or anything. It uses a MIDI thing, and it can't keep track of where things are, and it's
Wait, it doesn't use Yukon?
No,
I thought it did.
it does not.
Well, I've been lied to. Thank you very much, Mark.
It uses some weird MIDI protocol. Anyway,
What does this button say, the blue one?
nothing. It has two arrows on it. One goes up and one goes down. It is still both an analog and a digital console when that button is engaged. And if you hit this little button here that says channel, these encoders over here then become my analog level, and the faders become my Pro Tools level. And if it's the other way around, this is now my Pro Tools fader level on this little encoder, and this is my analog level, but don't worry about that.
Wait, what's the encoder? Can you show me that again?
I'll show you later. Okay, so the recall, and this will sound complicated, but it will make your life easy because you don't have to do any of the button presses, but don't rely on it completely. In the center section, there is a screen. These buttons here relate to these little things on the screen, which change based on where you're at. This one here says SSL, so number 8 right now activates SSL. So if I hit SSL, so once I hit SSL, it'll go yellow, and then these buttons will be these. Project, total recall, auto, links, yada yada. TR stands for total recall. When you open it, you'll see a project and a title displayed at the top. That could be anything based on who was previously in this room. So you might find that being, it might say MP441 Mendelssohn, and that's Mendelssohn's preferences, the stuff he likes. So you need to hit project, which project in this case would correspond to this button. So write these steps down. Hit SSL, then then look at what this green thing says. You want it to say all templates - copy me. That's the project we want to be in. All templates - copy me. So then you hit project. There's a button that will then appear which might say, let's see if that might say back. Well, it will say back. You might over here already see the one that says all templates. If you don't, hit back. And then use the encoder to scroll and find the one that says all templates copy me. You hit the button that says select, and then this little green thing at the top will say all templates. So the project we're working in is the one called all templates. Once that is green, then you can hit total recall, and then you'll see some things that are called, oh, I'm in the wrong project after just talking about that. You'll find something called monitor on QA, subgroup split, DAW, inline mode, stereo mix, 5.1 mix, 0 console split, in brackets inline, side by side. The one we're talking about is the one I've labeled called split. So that's the next session coming in here. So you navigate to the one called split, which in brackets says inline. I put that in there to try and make it clear that this turns the board into an inline console. You push the button that says select, and then you push the button So yeah, it would say inline. So you'd navigate to it, you'd select, and then you double tap the button that says set all, and the board is now fully configured. Mic input, split at the input, everything assigned to mix A, all the cues are turned on, all of the effects returns are assigned to mix A. I need to change this, but the board should be set to AFL. All 3 master faders are on and up. So all you need to do is turn phantom power on, turn your gain up, turn your control room level up, and you can record. Okay?
Can you go through that 2 or 3 more times?
Okay, I'm not going to point at the screen. I'm just going to say things so you can write it down. On the screen in the middle, press SSL. SSL might already be pressed when you arrive, so just make sure SSL is yellow. So press SSL. Okay? If it already at the top here says all templates, you're in the right project, because these recall settings are associated with the project. So then you're good. If it's not, you hit project, you find the one that says all templates. If you can't find it, you hit the button here that will say back. You hit back, you find all templates, and then you hit select. This will then say all templates at the top. It'll go green. You then hit TR, which stands for total recall. You navigate to the one that says split, in brackets inline, and then you hit set all. Hey, when you're finished, follow the same steps, and then instead of hitting split inline, I made one called zero console, which never existed for some reason, which is really stupid. So then you just select zero console, set all, double tap set all, and all of the assignments go off. All the faders will go down to -infinity, and you can, all the digital stuff becomes normal. Like, you still got to turn down the gain, you still got to put the pan stuff to the center, you still got to put your EQs back, but like all the assignments, mix A, phantom power, yeah, split mode, all of that shit will turn off, which saves you a lot of time. Okay, one last time, SSL. If it's green at the top and it says all templates, you're good. If it says something else, go to projects, find all templates. If you can't find it, hit back, then you will find it. Hit select. Hit total recall, find split in brackets inline, hit select, double tap set all. When you're done, follow exactly the same process, but instead of selecting split, select zero console, double tap set all, and it'll zero the whole board. Okay.
And this is something you do when you come in and when you leave every time?
Yeah. And that's if you want to use it in the way we're using it now. It saves a lot of steps. You also find that in the split template, I've turned on all QA on everything. Not up, just on, so you can avoid those button presses. And like, yeah, there's a bunch of other internal stuff that's been engaged that makes your workflow easier. So, that's it for the simple stuff. We don't have much time for the complicated stuff, but that's fine. So let's just, anyone who feels like their brain is exploding, then sweet. You guys can get out of here and I'll explain some other, I think we'll use the rest of the time to answer questions and maybe delve into some of the more complex stuff. Yes?
So you turn on all the cues and then you're just like, for you to just like patch and it goes straight to wherever you want, like Avioms.
Well, if you're using the cues, then you either using the cues because you're using a Redco or you're making a drum mix. For anything else, you just patch the output of Pro Tools like you do in any other room. Pro Tools returns sort of 25 for the vocal into the Aviom, so that's not even touching the board.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Josh.
The reverbs are not normal. Yeah, so that's another thing in this room. Reverbs. But like, if your brain is full, like, feel free to leave. I'm gonna keep talking, and it might get more confusing. So like, if you can't take it, then cool. I understand you might only want to know how to like record something, not all the other stuff. So that's fine. If you want to stay, that's cool. Reverbs are not normal at all in this room. The Bricasti is just there. you have to patch it. So what I'll usually do if I'm using the Bricasti is I'll patch from FX1, which is just a mono aux, into Bricasti 1. There's two Bricastis in here. I'll make sure the Bricasti is in mono left, so it's mono in, stereo out. And then I'm sending into the Bricasti. And then I'll patch the output of the Bricasti into, and this is where things get complicated. So just like on the Neve, this board has some stereo effects returns. So I like to use those just because I can and do, but you can also do it the way you do on the API. So you can patch the output of the reverb into the line input of a pair of faders. Or you can use the stereo returns. The output of the Bricasti are not normal to those, the way that they are in the Neve rooms. You still got to patch that. It's directly under the Bricasti output, so it's easy to find. You'll see Bricasti output, one left, one right, and right under that it says echo return, one left and right. Yeah, so if you want to patch the Bricasti into the stereo returns, just patch it out into the stereo returns. And these are the masters for the stereo returns. If you use my template, they are all already assigned to mix A, so you just turn them up. But this is just one of the stupidest parts about the whole SSL. If you wanna yourself assign it just to mix A, because obviously, just think of stereo returns as another pair of faders, right? They're just another place to get signal back to the board, and you need to assign it somewhere so you can hear it. If you want to assign it, this little button here that says AFL/select. If your routing network is off, so that means if you haven't pressed plus and minus, and it's just blank here, and you hit this little AFL select button next to the stereo return, that'll just solo the stereo return, so you'll hear your reverb soloed. If your routing network is on, and you hold down the AFL/select button, over here it will say stereo 1 or stereo 2 or whichever one you're dealing with, and that means that I can now assign it to mix A or mix B or mix C, whichever one I'm holding down. So it's one button with two functions. Duality.
Wait, can you say it again?
If the routing matrix is off, this little AFL, so when I say this, if this routing matrix is off, and you hit the AFL/select button, that is an AFL solo, so it just solos the return.
Okay.
If the routing matrix is switched on, so plus and minus, and there's something on the screen, that then becomes, it's no longer a solo, it is now the way to select the channel as if you were selecting any other channel on the board with this little select button. You know, if I hit 26 and it becomes 26, yeah. So if that's on and I hold down AFL/select and I assign it, I can then assign it to mix A, or I can assign it to a bus, or I can assign it to anything else.
And that's only monitor path, is that?
Yeah, I can assign it to a bus. No, I can't actually. I can only assign it to a mix. So yeah, you just assign it to a mix.
You're
bus.
just hearing it, and how are we getting that to ears? The way that you just.
Yes. Okay. So if you were using a Redco, over here, you can assign stereo. You can assign your stereo return into a foldback. So you just hit foldback A, and then you have your level control.
Where's your mouse at?
Sorry, over here. So you just hit foldback A, turn it up, and then your reverb return will be going into the Redco, like as a mix, and you can give them less or more. If you're using Avioms, you know what we normally do in the Neve rooms is we patch the output of the reverb into a stereo pair. You do that. You just patch the output of the reverb. The thing that gets a bit complicated is because the reverbs aren't normaled in here. In a Neve room, the reverbs are normaled to return to the stereo returns. So if you patch into the output of the reverb, you basically just take a copy of that into the Avioms, and you can still hear it on the Neve. Here, you're patching it into the returns, so you've already used up that patch point. So either you melt it and send it to the Avioms, or you return it to a pair of large faders, and then you patch like from the insert returns into the Avioms. Or if you want to print your reverb, you patch from the reverb into Pro Tools, and then you patch from the multi-track output into your Avioms. Many ways.
Is there a PFL or only an AFL button on the queues?
On the queues, there is only an AFL button, but that's just AFL after the master of the queue.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't necessarily need one.
No, I mean, can you route the cues to the mix B post pre-fader?
Route cues to the mix pre-fader. Yes. Well, not pre-fader of the master level, but if the cue itself is pre-fader, then it'll obviously be pre-fader of the channel.
Okay.
And you do that over here where it says mix reassign. So you can source QA into your main mix.
Okay.
You just hit QA and it'll source itself into the main mix, or QB. While we're over here, I'm just getting into deeper stuff now, guys. This is not stuff you have to know, it just might help your workflow in certain situations. Stereo mix, the stereo mix matrix. So remember I said earlier, if you want to monitor mix A on the speakers, so you hit mix A. That's like just hitting mix 1 and 2 on the Neve or whatever when you're monitoring. This is the option for stereo mix. If you hit stereo mix, you're monitoring whatever you're assigning to the stereo mix. So you can assign mix A, B, and C, one of them or all of them. So that's what I do, because I use mix B. I use mix A for everything, and I use mix B usually for my band talkback mics and my click track, so that if I forget to mute them before a take, it doesn't fuck up my board mix. If I want to turn the click track up to check if they're in time, the click track is not stuck in my board mix. So basically I print mix A for the board mix, but I still want to monitor mix B in the control room, in which case I don't actually hit mix A, I hit stereo mix, and I assign mix A and mix B to my stereo mix so that I'm hearing that. And that means for my band talkbacks, I assign those only to mix B. For my click track, I assign that only to mix B. Band talkbacks, let's talk about that real quick. Bear with me here, this is going to get a little funky. So, there is QA and there is QB. I'll usually be using QA for my drum mix, and I'll be using QB to get my band talkbacks into the Avioms. Okay? So, there's only one control though on a channel strip, but can you see here it says QB? So here's another duality moment of doing two things at once. This little button here that says set EFX/QB, I hold that down and then I press down on this pot. Like I press down on that. And then this little light will come on, and now it's no longer QA, it's QB. So that's similar to the API. You know, API it's either aux 9 and 10 or aux 11 and 12, depending on which one you select. On this, it's either QA or QB, and the way you do that is you hold down the set EFX/QB button and you press down on that. And now QA becomes QB. The other thing is, when I mute my talkbacks at the beginning of the take to avoid all that crazy bleed, do I want it to be muted to the Avioms as well? Yes.
Yes.
Because otherwise they're going to be playing, the drummer will be playing and it'll sound chaotic because it's just this loud ass talkback mic. But these Q sends are pre-fader by default, which means if I mute it in here, it's not going to mute going out to the Avioms. So again, another duality moment. You hold down the source select button and you hit the green thing again. So hold source select and then you hit the green thing, and then the post light will come on and it'll become post fader. So yeah, I'll patch mics in. Oh, and the other thing, if I'm in split mode, which I am now, for the band talkbacks, I don't want to be in split mode. I'm not recording them, they're not going to Pro Tools, they're just happening in the room. So then I'll just select those 4 channels. So routing matrix on, hit the select button so it's flashing, hit, let's say they're all at the end of the board, hit 45 to 48, oops, that fucked up, sorry, let's turn that on again. So 45 to 48, those are now selected. I'm going to take those out of split mode, still mic input, channel output doesn't matter, we're not using the channel output, and then assign them to mix B. Now I just raise the faders and the mics will come straight out of the speakers, they're not going to go to Pro Tools. Okay? Then send them to the queues, patch. So now what I would do, sorry, this gets really a little confusing, that's why I say if you're not into all of this crazy workflow, then don't worry about it, you don't need it, but it's useful to know. I I'm gonna use, because I'm already using Foldback A. This is for a situation where I'm using Avioms. I'm using Foldback A for my control room talkback to the Avioms. I've patched it. I press Foldback A and my voice will come there. It'd be useful if I can get the band talkbacks to go to the same channel. So in order to do that, I've assigned, I'm going to send them all to QB. I'm going to post fader. I can now hit QB, assign QB into Foldback A. Make sense? So now their talkbacks will go to the same channel that my talkback goes to. Because I've sent them post fader, when I mute them, they also mute going to the Avioms. So before a take, I just hit mute. It's all cut and clean. Cool.
Mute is in like on those individual.
As in mute them on the individual tracks, and they will mute because I made them post fader. Now they're all the way over here, which is slightly annoying. But we have all these VCA masters, and these are really easy to use. They're awesome. If I have 45 to 48 already selected, because I just selected them to do some other stuff, so you got to select the channels, which they are. I'm going to raise up group 8. These are called groups. So this is the master fader. All of these are groups. We've got 8 of them. I'm going to raise up group 8. And then I literally just hit the select switch at the bottom. And now all of those faders are grouped together. If I hit mute here, they mute over there. Let me just raise these faders a bit.
Can you go over that?
Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see, but they're moving right now.
Wow. That's
So,
magic.
and then if I mute them, so that's easy because then between takes, I don't have to worry about them. They're all over there. I just mute them and unmute them.
Wait, how did you do that? Man?
So you select them the same as you would for any other function. Turn the matrix on, select 2 there. I've got 47 to 48 all 45 to 48 all selected. And then I would first pull the fader up, the group fader, and then you hit the little group button at the bottom. And then you'll see it'll go green. And next to the faders at the end here, if you guys can see, the little little light next to group 8 comes out to tell you that they're assigned to group 8. If I assign them also to group 3, that little light that says group 3 will also come on. So I'll usually use these extensively. I always use group 8 for the talkbacks. I'll use a group for my drums. I'll use a group if I have like 5 keyboards, a group for BGVs, so I have VCA masters for all of them. Make sense? Okay. Side-by-side mode. Okay, so the one big thing that you need to remember when it comes to split mode is you don't have a cut at the small fader, you don't have a small fader, you can't turn it right off. So if you need to turn phantom power off to go change a mic, and you have the output of that mic from Pro Tools plugged into an Aviom, and you hit phantom power, even if your channel is cut over here, you're only cutting the monitor path. You're still going to blow someone's head off because the phantom will go or something, right? So if you're in split mode, the only way to stop that from happening is to disarm the track in Pro Tools. So that's the thing to remember in this workflow. If you're using this workflow, before you do anything, disarm the track in Pro Tools. And that's one of the reasons I like to work in side-by-side mode, where I have a channel path and monitor path. That's a stupid reason, but it is one of the reasons. So let's just talk about that real quick. I'll just run through the workflow of that. I'm going to use my total recall quickly by going SSL. We're in the right project, total recall, 0 console, select, double tap, set all. I've normaled the board. Now, if I wanted to do side-by-side mode, which is split mode on any other console, but on this console, I'm calling it side-by-side mode. Oh, by the way, to get out of this total recall system, you just hit SSL again. Anyway, console's normaled. If I want to have level to tape, monitor return, select. 2, here, left-hand side of the board is selected. This side, we want the mic input, right? Do we need to assign it to a mix bus? Because it's the channel path? No. Cool. Done. That's all we need to do. Which levels do we want to see on the meters? Probably the input, so we can select input. Then we can see the mic levels. Done. Disengage. Now we hit 25, 2, 48. These ones, we want the line input returned from Pro Tools. Do we want these assigned to a mix bus?
Yes.
Yep. Cool. Assigned to mix A. And that's done. Cool. So now now I have my processing here will all be in the channel path. Anything I do will go to Pro Tools. Oh, the one important thing, sorry, I should have said this. Let's go back to the side, select 2. Where do I want the channel output on this side?
Post fader.
Post fader. So you just select channel output post fader because this is level to tape. You want to be able to control the level going to Pro Tools. If you have it pre-fader, there's no point. On this side, where do I want the channel output?
The channel output.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You're not using the channel output. Now, in the preset I made for this mode, the channel output is selected to something called EFX, and that gives you the ability to use 24 additional effect sends or make more Q mixes. But that's not really important, and very rarely. I used it the other day because I was using QA for my drum mix, I was using QB for my talkbacks, and I had a whole horn section and not enough Avioms. So I wanted to make them a whole other mix for their Redcos. So then I used this mode called EFX to send another mix to buses, and I patched the buses into the Redcos. But like, unless you have like an 18-piece band in here, you're probably not going to need all that functionality, but it does exist. There's a whole bunch of shit in here. You can actually run this console. You can actually run this console the same way we run the Neve with like a full-on small fader. You can turn the QA into a small fader, but then you only have 24 channels because of the whole thing to do with buses. So there's like so much deep workflow to this board, so we're only really touching the surface of it. Anyway, this is now side-by-side mode. Level to tape, monitor return, you know, assign your phantom power. Just make sure, obviously, in that case, you want...
Can you save that to a preset?
It is already, yeah. Just make sure in that case you'd have obviously like, say your channel is coming up on 24, you'd want in on 24, out on 25. You'd have to have uncorresponding things. So in that case, I'd usually have all my inputs coming in 21 through 24, all my outputs going in 25 through 48. And I have been speaking a lot, and I have a session to do now, so I'm going to call it a day. Any last minute questions?
Why?
But can you see that, like, I know it's a lot, but the workflow is really fast on this board because you literally load up a preset, or even if you're not using presets, you literally just do a global assignment or something, and it's all done. There's also like, you just pan something. You have to fucking turn pan on. You just pan it. So it's like really nice.
That's cool.
Wow.
Woo!
Okay, does everyone feel relatively on top of it, or does it feel like chaotic?
Good.